Animal welfare. All I can say is that every time a big truck drives by with pigs inside of it, I do cry, and they look very sad.
Can you tell me what the Farm Bill is?
Nope. Farm Bill? Yeah, nope.
Animal welfare? Well, I assume that's when an animal family is below the poverty line and receives additional support from the government. So the Farm Bill is the man who has worked on the farm for 80 years.
Tell me, what do you know about Proposition 12 in California?
Oh, nothing. I know nothing about that. I'm so sorry. Animal welfare, like how they take care of the animals. You know, agricultural and food things.
I don't know what the Farm Bill is.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the CAP podcast. My name is Sydney.
And I'm your co-host, Jessica, and today we will be talking to Ashlyn and Kesley with Beefing Up the Debate. These two have put together a fun episode talking about the differences between the show cattle and the production cattle industries.
Yeah, so we're going to turn it over to them to do a deeper dive into the beef industry. Hey everyone, I wanted to come on and apologize real quick and correct ourselves. One of our hosts is named Kesley, not Kelsey. We do apologize for that.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another sizzling episode of Beefing Up the Debate. I'm one of your beef-loving hosts, Kesley Holgraver.
And I'm your other host, Ashlyn Frederick.
We are turning up the heat this week, everybody, and we're going to have another solid beef industry debate today.
Yes, that's right. In this episode, we're putting show cattle industry in one corner and production cattle industry in the other. Who will come out as the heavyweight champion? Well, we're here to find out.
So get ready for a sizzling showdown between these two beef industry giants. However, it's not just us debating this one out today. We're going to hear from real-life people from both sides of the industry.
So giving the perspective from the show cattle industry, we will hear from Kylie Allen. Kylie Allen is a current student at Iowa State University. She has grown up showing cattle all around the world. Her family has a huge influence in the Hereford genetics. She has family in Texas, also with a seed stock background and operation.
Giving the perspective of the cattle production side, we'll get the chance to hear from Sam Martin, who served as the Iowa FFA president this past year, and he grew up with a huge background in the beef production industry, where he grew up on a farm in southwest Iowa where he had a cow-calf operation, and he also sold bulls, so a very heavy production background.
Our last guest speaker is a non-biased veterinarian who deals with both sides, Macy Moore. Macy Moore is a current vet student at Iowa State University. She has a background in both the production and the show industry. She grew up on a cow-calf operation and also traveled around the state showing cattle. And now as a future veterinarian, she deals with both sides, caring for these livestock animals.
So let's get this debate sizzling, Ashlyn.
Yeah!
To kick things off, we have Kylie Allen here. She is our show cattle industry expert. Kylie, can you start things off and give a little introduction about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on, ladies. As she said, my name is Kylie Allen. I'm currently a junior at Iowa State in Ag Communication and Animal Science, and I grew up in northwest Iowa on a small fair-to-finish and cow-calf operation where we raise purebred Hereford show cattle as well as purebred show swine.
So, Kylie, for like the average listener that's listening in that doesn't have that egg background necessarily, could you give us a little 101 what the show industry is?
Yeah, so the show cattle industry is a group, we can say it's a community of people that are very passionate about raising fundamentally correct livestock as well as raising competitive youth in the agricultural industry.
Perfect. So to continue off of that, how do you believe the show cattle industry contributes to youth education and development in agriculture?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know the numbers. They exist somewhere out there. But the show industry has the unique opportunity to expose kids to a facet of agriculture that many kids may not have the ability to experience. For example, myself, I didn't grow up on a commercial with a commercial ag background, but the show industry allowed myself to get involved in agriculture, and thus I will pursue a full-time career in the ag industry.
Along with that, so what are some of the key educational and skill building aspects that young individuals can gain from participating in the show cattle industry?
Sure. I mean, I guess you name it, I think you can get it. As far as hard work and responsibility goes, you're taking care of those animals every day. Rain or shine, nice weather or not so nice weather. The industry also allows kids the opportunity to develop a lot of those soft skills, as well as a network that we know all too well that the world is smaller than a person thinks. So you run into people that, we're going to work with later on down the road in our careers, as well as getting those career-ready skills, so to speak.
Could you maybe share some personal success stories or examples of how the show cattle industry has positively impacted youth involvement in agriculture, and maybe specifically in your life as well?
Sure. So I think that my brother and I would be a prime example. My mom always says that we knew, we being my parents, that they knew they wanted their kids to be exposed to the ag industry, and that they had the resources for that exposure to be the show industry. There are numerous success stories. I think myself and my brother included, we've had the opportunity to get involved in the agriculture industry as a whole, and we'll probably go on to have a professional career in the ag industry.
That is awesome, Kylie. But to switch things up, a big topic in conversation is always animal welfare. And when you think of the show industry, I don't know, when I think about it, I think it's some of our most pampered animals. So could you talk about a little bit what you guys do maybe on your operation about making sure animal welfare and all that good stuff is happening on the farm?
Absolutely. I think you said it best. They are some of the most pampered, most babied animals I think I have ever seen. As with any production or commercial producer, rather, these animals are our livelihoods, our babies, so we make sure that they are treated the best possible. So that means having them under fan, they're cool when it's hot, they're warm when it's cold, things like that, making sure they always have feed. But the show industry as a whole has a lot of rules and regulations in place just to kind of keep reminding everybody that ethical treatment is first and foremost important.
What are some of the changes or innovations that you see on the horizon for the show cattle industry?
Yeah, I mean, as with any industry, the show industry is constantly changing and evolving. And whether that be new nutritional supplements, new tack and things, I'm probably not the exact expert to speak on those up-and-coming things, but there's always a lot of exciting change happening.
So we've been asking a lot of people this on our podcast. So what do you think in the beef industry or even just the show cattle industry is maybe a misconception that you see?
I think on the show side, a misconception that I hear quite a bit is that we're all bad people, right? And I think that as with any industry, sure, you have a couple bad apples, but as a whole, I believe that the show industry has a lot of good people. I always say that I started showing because it's what my dad did, it's what my mom did, but I stayed because those people are so welcoming. They always have your back. They've written so many letters of recommendation for me. The people are really what makes the industry.
Awesome. So to wrap things up, we have one final question for you. How can the cattle production industry work together with the show cattle industry to maybe promote more of a comprehensive and sustainable cattle sector?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, the animals that we are parading around the ring are exaggerated versions. We're shooting for the perfect animal, right? So we're going for all of those fundamental. We want them to be super sound. We want them to market. We want them to be feed efficient and put on a lot of pounds, hang good carcasses. On the breeding side, we want them to be able to lay down and have a calf. And so at the end of the day, it's a matter of making sure we don't get too exaggerated with those things, right? But the good thing is that the show industry has the production industry kind of in their back pocket. So there's still plenty of smaller commercial cow-calf guys that, for example, I have raised a couple bulls, and I look at them and I go, you're not meant for the show ring, but they go down to Texas and they make good calves. So the cattle can go both ways, and I think it's a matter of keeping everybody happy. I don't know.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having us, or letting us have you today, Kylie. It was awesome to see your point of view about how you think the show cattle industry looks and what you think some of the misconceptions are, and really just giving us an overall background on what it looks like. So thank you so much. We are back to beefing up this debate, listeners, and with us today is Sam Martin. Sam is originally from Southwest Iowa, and he grew up on a production operation, and with that, he is very heavily a part of the cattle production industry. So to start us off, Sam, why don't you just tell us more about yourself?
Yeah, so first off, thanks for having me on the podcast. I come from Southwest Iowa originally, where I was raised on a beef and row crop farm. As far as the beef side goes, we've done a little bit of everything. Was cow calf for as long as I can remember until I was about 15, 16. Then we got into the bred heifer business for 4 or 5 years. Then we've had a little bit of a turbulent market this last about year and a half now, and we got into the stockers, trying to turn them quick and ride that market up. So background in cattle out of western Nebraska and western South Dakota. Like I said, always been a huge part of my life as being part of the ag industry in general. Beef has definitely always been my passion ever since I was very young. Came to Iowa State, majored in animal science, my junior here now, and definitely want to be working in the animal science industry. Beef would be the preference. Worked this last summer with Balance Forward, a cattle feeding and consultant company out of Nottoway, Iowa, that has somewhat kind of management over about 500,000 head throughout western Iowa, eastern Nebraska, eastern Kansas, and northwest Missouri. So definitely been in it just above the farm level as well, and then hope to work for Merck this upcoming summer as a consumer affairs and traceability intern. Trying to make sure consumers know that they're getting a safe, quality product every time they go to the grocery store.
Perfect. So to start us off, could you please provide a little overview of the cattle production industry and what you believe its primary objectives are in raising cattle for meat and dairy?
Yeah, so I think when we think America, we think the cattle production industry. I think it's kind of, it made a lot of men in this country and women, and it made it, Americans needed a good protein substance as we moved westward, and I think we really developed the cattle industry from there. We're taking ground that is not suitable for crop production, for other uses, and turning that ground into productive protein for people all across not just the United States but America. And I think that's that whole part. Ag has so many facets, right? And this is the cattle industry is trying to take that land that we can't use for other uses and turning it into a viable food source. And it's grown from there. We've seen a lot of change in the cattle production industry. And when you talk about meat and dairy, you have two vastly different markets there. We've also seen a lot of the beef on dairy take a larger market share in this last few years. And I think that'll be something to look at as, we got to have dairy cows, and trying to make those cows have more value in the feedlot will be a big thing. How we feed cattle's changed over the years. Instead of, a lot of grazing and then shipping them to market. In a cowboy sense, we have more concentrated feedlots with a concentrated ration. We've learned how to feed cattle better, how to keep that rumen healthy. And I think cattle industry as a whole will always keep, in my eyes, a very large part of the marketplace. It's almost becoming almost more luxury beef, or luxury item. And as we see more countries move into more of a first world approach, in the global market. I think we're going to see more of a demand for beef outside the United States, especially in Asia, Southeast Asia, as we move farther into the 21st century and beyond.
So you did a really great job of giving an overview of the cattle production industry. And as I mentioned or talked to you earlier about, this podcast is about looking at that difference between that cattle production industry and the show industry. So for our listeners who might not quite understand that big difference between the two, could you touch a little bit on the difference that the cattle production industry brings, like for the economic sustainability in agriculture, and how does that contribute to the global food supply compared to the show industry?
Yeah, I think you have to, if we first look at the roots of the show industry, it actually was meant for producers to show off their production stock, right? And the whole goal of production animals is to produce the most efficient, best animal for the end consumer in bulk, right? I mean, I couldn't tell you actual market share right now of what actually, what hangs that is production ag and versus show industry ag, but I can tell you it's probably north of 90%. It is the backbone of how we produce cattle. When you go to and this goes outside the cattle show ring more, especially I think about it in hogs a lot too, is if you go and, look at a show ring, that's what maybe 5-10% of the animals look like. When you go to a pasture in western Nebraska, western Montana, that is almost a different animal. That is something that has been built to survive, to be able to endure harsh conditions, to be able to thrive on those conditions. And again, like I said in the beginning, we are trying to take land that is not in productive use for other things like corn production, soybean production, and turn it into a protein source that we as humans can tap into and bring economic value. So I think numbers look different. I mean, you see a working ranch in Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri. Those cows got to pay for themselves each and every day, and they have to pay for themselves in a show cattle operation, but they pay for themselves in a different. I think in the show cattle industry, there is so much attention to a few more than it's very hard culling in the production industry of this cow can't be productive and bring home income every year. I don't care how great her leg is. I don't care what show she won. She's got to be able to lay down, have a calf by herself, get him up, and raise him from day one until slaughter or weaning. And so I think we're just looking at two different animals now than we did. Like I said, when we first started showing animals at exhibition, it was just to show off producers' genetics as having the best, most efficient animal and selling those genetics.
Yeah, so going off of that, how do you think that the cattle production industry engages and educates the youth that are interested in agriculture, particularly through programs like 4-H and FFA?
Yeah, I think 4-H, FFA, definitely with my background, has been huge parts of my life, right? I think you see it more in your county fairs. You see a lot of your production, more style animals show up to the fair. Maybe not your top tier, what we imagine as the shows tier with the fluffy legs and whatnot that you see at Fort Worth or Denver or anything like that. But you definitely see students getting the basic principles of what the cattle industry is all about. How do I look at a balance sheet? How do I know what to feed them? How am I going about my everyday management? And I think that's important. I think with the average age of farmers and ranchers these days being right around that 60 age, it's important to have more youth in it. And 4-H and FFA have done a good job of carrying that torch into the 21st century and making sure that we still have youth that are wanting to be involved in agriculture and are learning the basics at a small scale so they can do it at a large scale. I know that's what got me first interested in cattle, other than, our family just raising them, but definitely got me into, okay, what's the management look like? How do I run finances? How do I make numbers work? How do I make sure I'm going to come out at the end of the day and have a profit? That definitely was first seen in 4-H and FFA.
You talked about, county fairs and looking at that. So what I'm picturing is the Iowa State Fair. A lot of fairgoers walk through that and they see these big fluffy cows and being treated so awesomely. They're getting brushed, they're getting combed and all that jazz. And on the production side, maybe people who stepped away from agriculture don't see that. So how are people on the production side still ensuring animal welfare and all that good jazz?
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing. As we get more and more removed from the family farm, I mean, we're about 5-6 generations removed from the family farm. We forget what agriculture is like. And, you know, I value that consumer that wants to be a critic because it makes sure I'm doing a good job every day, right? We had a group of Chicago kids, inner city Chicago kids that had never been on a farm, never even seen a gravel road, come to our farm and actually tour our beef operation, our row copper operation, and to explain to them how the work we put in and how much we care about them, because they're our bottom line. Like, I mean, I've sat out in the middle of snowstorms trying to help cows. I mean, we have our heart on the line just as much as any show industry person would, I believe. I think as we transition into this age of digital technology, and it's so much easier to reach people, I think we've seen a lot of bad message about production ag sent, but I would say there's been a lot of good ones. If you start looking at like the YouTube farmers or those that are trying to market their beef, especially coming out of COVID locally more, with you know the supply chain issues we had, we saw a rise in local lockers being put up, people wanting to buy local, they want to know their story, and I think if people can show their story, explain why they do and then like and somebody feels like they have an actual connection with where their food comes from, I think it shows how much we actually care in production ag. You get that, you know, factory farm feel, like all that thrown around a lot, but at the end of the day, you know, there's a lot of family owned production, multi-generational farms like that I'm a part of, you know, that really do make up the heartbeat of the cattle industry in America. And I think that is something we need to value and we need to share with people, and we need to embrace technology to do it. I think that comes a lot with the younger generation, but again, I don't think an old dog can't learn new tricks. I mean, I think it's an everybody effort, but I definitely think I've seen in the last 5 years that increase a lot. And I think it's the direction we need to go, because you get hit with so many labels, you know, non-GMO, hormone-free, organic, all that. It becomes overwhelming with the consumer. I think, you know, you show them what you do, how much you care, and that's going to have more value at the end of the day.
So one of the biggest arguments maybe between the show cattle industry and the cattle production industry is that resources spent on cattle shows could be better allocated towards cattle production. What is your response to this argument, and how do you believe, like, what is the value of the cattle production industry?
Yeah, so first off, the value. I mean, without production ag, you know, commercial cattlemen, we don't have beef in the U.S. That's just the bottom line of it. Like, we make up well over 90% of the market share. Like, that's the way it is. It goes back to, again, when shows were first created, they were meant to show off superior genetics, promote those genetics to make everybody in your area better. It also helps that farmer. When I look at show cattle today, they have their spot as, you know, maybe the flashy, you know, everybody from a broader scope maybe sees those. And that is helping us. It is promoting beef. But at the same time, it's not promoting the same production of beef that, you know, I am. And I think we've bred into show cattle, you know, genetic defects that we wouldn't have. If you go into some of those, you know, seed stock guys for show cattle with a bigger hoof dimension, a bigger back leg, that's what they really want because that looks good in the ring. Man, I wouldn't want, you know, as, you know, freakishly large as they get out on the middle of a pasture in Nebraska. Either you're going to have too much problems, you know, birthing. I mean, our show heifers never really did the best in the herd, not like some of our production cattle. It's just a different animal. They're bred to be different. I think we need to maybe promote a little bit more of production ag, but I don't think we need to wait on people to do that. I think production ag people need to promote production ag. It's two different animals right now. It is two different types of genetics. It's two different end goals that we're wanting. And I think we're sometimes losing the value of what a student is supposed to learn through show. And that's not the part. Spending crazy amounts of money on a steer that, I mean, you wouldn't do that in production ag, right? A steer is going to look the same on the hanging rail no matter what. I mean, he's worth so much a pound, and that's it. That's all the consumer's going to buy. So taking that into account, it worries me sometimes. I've shown, but definitely something to think about.
So then to kind of take a turn on this that we're asking questions about is we've been kind of wanting to know what's the biggest misconception you believe that's going on in the cattle production industry. We've kind of been asking everybody to see what they think. You have a different viewpoint than what show industry fellows going to think. So kind of ask you what you think the biggest misconception people have about the cattle industry.
Yeah, I think we've touched on it a little bit already. Is I think maybe on a per consumer basis on treatment of how we treat our animals. I have cousins even that went to Des Moines public schools and they were told one thing, even though they weren't that far removed from the animal agriculture. They've chosen a vegan lifestyle, whatnot. And I think it's because maybe there's not as much trust. Sometimes with animal production ag, we see big farms, we see this, we see that. And I think promoting beef and what family farms are actually about and whatnot, and seeing it play out on almost like a day-to-day is huge. I saw a thing one day that, who's done the best at that kind of in recent years, maybe minus some of the things in it, but kind of maybe the day-to-day ranch is the series Yellowstone. People love that. Beef sales actually went up after people really got into Yellowstone. It was weird. I heard a podcast on it and whatnot, so it was strange. I think another thing that consumers may not know so much about, and a misconception that we have, is mandatory country of origin labeling, so MCOOL. Now, this might seem foreign to people outside of the industry, but it's definitely something prevalent and that we worry about. If a product is grown in the USA, butchered in the USA and all that, sometimes you don't actually know that. I know people that'll ship cattle in that are cheaper from like Argentina, per se, but then they're processed here and it's labeled as USA beef. And that's very misleading for consumers. I think we want to put our dollar back on something that's red, white, and blue, and that is going back to our economies. And I think a lot of consumers don't know about that. I know there's been a lot of groups fighting on behalf of producers for MCOOL. And it's something I hope that we can keep pushing, and is definitely going to be something that's definitely mandatory, because we want to make sure we're buying USA beef to support our own domestic markets.
Yeah, so to wrap things up, we have one final question for you. So how do you think the cattle production industry and the show cattle industry can work together to promote a more comprehensive and sustainable cattle sector?
Yeah, so I think, and this is really good, I know shows that do this, like I think Iowa State Fair does a great job with their FFA production beef show that is steers that are, judged on the rail and judged on feed efficiency and what's your profitability going to look like. And I think that kind of show, which has gained a lot of traction in the last however many years. Like I never knew about it for a long time, but I've gotten into it, and I see that is truly showing what a production steer is supposed to do. That is where students are learning, how do I make money in this industry? How can I stay viable? And it lets consumers that are coming to somewhere like the Iowa State Fair, there's so many people that will pass through there. Okay, this is what production ag really looks like. So I think maybe a few more of those, blow and go shows, whatever you want to call them, promoting beef on the production level in the same venues as some of those, like the big show cattle things, and recognizing that they're kind of two different animals, two different beasts, I think is big, so that I think it'll help cattle production, and I think it'll help show cattle, because the more we promote beef in general is going to help both. And that's the big thing. So trying to find some common ground there, trying to make sure people that are going realize, and I don't know, we're all on the same team at the end of the day. Like, we want the same goals. I hope. I mean, that I think I want the same goals as everyone else, and that's to make sure that there's stakes on everybody's plates, that we are going to be around for another 100 years. So.
You made a lot of amazing points. I think whether if you're listening to this podcast and you have an agricultural background or if you don't, this is definitely, you made a lot of amazing points. You can learn a lot by just listening to this. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to before we wrap this up?
No, that's about all I have. I want to thank you guys for having me on. It's been a true pleasure. I think you guys are doing a great job promoting ag in general and beef, and I don't know, that's about all I got.
That was awesome. Thanks for bringing another side or point of view to this conversation, and thanks for helping us beef up this debate, Sam.
Our next guest speaker is Macy Moore. Macy's going to kick things off with a little background about herself and being a vet student at Iowa State. Take it over, Macy.
Hi, my name is Macy Moore, and I'm currently a vet student at Iowa State. I grew up on a cow-calf operation in southeast Iowa that we also had diversified crops on. Cattle was our main entity, but we also had corn and soybeans and alfalfa hay growing up. I also was fortunate enough to show cattle when I was in 4-H and FFA. So from 4th grade up to senior in high school, I showed cattle competitively at our county fair and at some other jackpot shows around the state. And now I'm a vet student at Iowa State in my first year, hoping to get my DVM and also my PhD.
So Macy, you're kind of like our middleman in this conversation. You're going to give us a little background on the show cattle side of things and then also the production side of things. So for our listeners that are listening in right now that don't really have that background in both industries, could you also give us a little overview of like a one-on-one what the show cattle is and then a little one-on-one what the production side is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the production side of things is gonna more be so on a herd base. So we deal with a lot of bigger numbers or things that we manage things more as a group, whereas the show cattle side, I would say, is managed more on an individual basis. So we take care of feed rations and health and all of those things on an individual basis on the show cattle side. Whereas the more of the production side, I would say, is managed more as a group. So when we do things health-wise or feed-wise, we're doing them as a group. So we're feeding everything the same ration or giving them all the same antibiotics or different vaccines that they're needed, not more so on an individual basis like show cattle is.
So with having an internship under a veterinarian, what are maybe some of the key differences you've observed in the care and management of cattle within the two industries?
Yeah, great question. So the show cattle side, like I mentioned, is very much so individually based. So a lot of those times we're still seeing a lot of preventative care done, especially with show cattle being, introduced to a lot of different herds at the same time. When we take them to shows, they're kind of interacting or in the same area as other herds from a lot of different areas. So we can see the spread of diseases and things happen a lot more rapidly with show cattle. And so I think on the preventative side, we try to do a lot to prevent those diseases and things from getting involved. But also on, taking care of those diseases as we see them come. Things like ringworm and things like that can spread very quickly through show cattle. And so some of those skin diseases and things, we see a lot more in show cattle than we do on a production side, especially when those production animals can generally be kind of reserved to their own setting. They aren't introduced to a lot of different herds at the same time. And so as a health perspective, we do a lot of preventative care, but sometimes those treatment things, even through a herd can be spread on an individual animal basis, but they aren't necessarily being introduced to as many things as like show cattle are being traveled across the state and even across the country.
You mentioned a little bit earlier about your background within, 4-H and FFA. So with that in mind, in what way do those programs influence the knowledge and practices of young cattle handlers on both sides of this sector?
Yeah, so I would say growing up in 4-H and FFA, having both the production and show cattle background, I can definitely see where both are advantageous for those individuals to get involved with. I think that 4-H kind of offers a unique perspective for individuals to kind of start in the show industry. I think that that's more of an avenue, whereas FFA may offer more opportunities for production-based type learning. I think both are really great, and I obviously grew up with both. I think that there's kind of a stigma about production people not liking show industry and show industry not liking production. And I think as a veterinarian, I see the perspective that both offer really great things, and especially in 4-H and FFA offering some youth some just really great hands-on experience. I think the production base can lead a lot more towards like the economic side. When we talk about, the production side, I think we talk about a lot of like, what's our bottom line? Are we being feed efficient? Whereas like the show industry, the money side doesn't matter as much, just because we're able to spend a lot more on those individual projects and see the return that we're wanting in the ring, not maybe as far as like the carcass values and things like that, where that production is more based on. So I think they have some different goals in mind with what they teach, but they both have really great, just basic skills like responsibility, going out and feeding your animals. That's important for both, right? We have to have live animals for both of those projects. So I think there's some bottom line things that are taught through both, but different aspects can be touched on and maybe more emphasized in those specific areas.
Yes, so from your standpoint as a future veterinarian, what are the common health and welfare considerations that apply to both the show cattle and the production cattle industries?
Yeah, great question. So I touched on a little bit about how we kind of view production as more of a herd health management on the health side, and maybe on the show cattle side, looking at more of an individual basis. I think that preventative measures pretty much across the board would be very similar. Sometimes when we're talking about show cattle, we don't see them necessarily grazing on pasture or being involved in being exposed, I should say, to more of those environmental factors that we maybe see in herd health. So things like when we're doing like just a fall vaccine protocol or things like that, we might not be vaccinating for as much with our show cattle that we do on our herd side. And I think that it's true when we come involved with like herd health and things like when we experience pink eye or things like that. Not that they aren't in show cattle, but I think that we see a little bit more risk on the production side, just being, in summer pastures, we're going to see a lot of pink eye and more things like that. Where at the show cattle side, we're going to see, like I mentioned before, like some ringworm and things like that can be spread through. So we see some different diseases being more emphasized in each general area. But, especially when we talk about production, we're going to see them go through different stages in life. Like feedlot is very different than when we're raising them on the cow. And so we see a lot of different disease pathways through those differences too. So a lot of differences, but as far as management, the practices should be very similar in that, we're noticing disease, we're out with our animals almost every day to see the onset symptoms and things happening within our herd or within our individual animals, and contacting veterinarians to know best ways to treat those.
You made some really great points throughout that. So looking at that, so from your vantage point or what you're looking at, how can you see these two sectors really learn from each other to come together and collaborate to overall just promote beef?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that both, like I mentioned, going through a 4-H or FFA program have a lot of great benefits in learning the best way to manage our animals, right? We, as 4-H and FFA, have a lot of people looking in at us when we're talking about the show industry. We get a lot of kind of publicity from the public that may not be exposed to these types of environments or even what beef cattle is all about. And I think that it's important that we're able to capitalize on the ability for the public to really see the whole entirety of the project and how we treat our animals, and whether they're being pampered in the show barn or whether they're being, taken well care of out on the summer pasture. There's a lot that we can offer through those programs to promote beef and promote the way and healthy ways that we take care of our animals, and try to promote, the sustainability of not only the industry, our resources that we're using to take care of those animals, taking care of the land that they're grazing on, taking care of what we're putting into them as veterinarians with vaccines and medicine to prevent disease, but also treat disease, and how that's affecting, when the consumer gets it as a steak on their plate, what are the implications of us, using what we do as veterinarians in the show cattle industry and as the production industry. You know, the main goal is to get food on the plate for the consumer, and so it's important that we're using the best practices that we can, emphasizing on the points that production animals do and show cattle does, that we're doing the best that we can to promote the industry as a whole.
I totally agree with you. You know, there might be two different industries and have two different practices, but at the end of the day, it's all one team and one goal, putting beef on the plate to make sure beef is what's for dinner. And I'd just like to thank you for sitting down with us and really providing us with that overall perspective of both sides. So thank you so much for your time, Macy.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Wow, Ashlyn, what a discussion we've had today on beefing up the debate. Exploring the intricacies of show cattle industry versus the cattle production industry has been quite the journey we've been on.
Yes, Kesley, it sure has. And it's clear that there's no one-size-fits-all answer to the question of which is more beneficial or practical. It really depends on the goals and perspective of all those involved.
Exactly. We've heard some compelling arguments from both sides, from the educational and developmental benefits of the show cattle industry to the economical and nutritional importance of cattle production.
In the end, it's all about striking a balance and understanding that both these aspects of the beef industry have their place. We can learn from each other and find common ground together.
And that's what we aim to do on this podcast: foster understanding, spark meaningful conversations, and celebrate our shared love for beef.
Hey, we're back, and I just want to start out with a big thank you to all of the guests that they brought on today for giving us a good overview of different parts of the beef industry. It's always fun to hear perspectives from people who work within these industries and have firsthand knowledge on how they fit within agriculture. The beef industry especially is so widely versed, and as you heard today, different people have kind of different perspectives on what a good beef animal looks like. The show cattle and production cattle industries are very different, but I think they're both important parts of the industry as a whole, and hearing from both sides is really, really beneficial.
I couldn't agree more. I personally don't have connections to the beef industry, but I found it really interesting to learn about its inner workings and just being a little bit more educated myself.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex industry, but we're all in it for the same goal. Let's make a good cow, right? So hearing from these guests and from their shared experiences just shows us how diverse that industry is, and it gave us a lot of really good info.
Yeah, for sure. So we will see you guys next time on the CAP Podcast. To email us with any comments, questions, or concerns, please send us an email at contemporary@iastate.edu.